Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Troy Arthur. I'm a director in academic and membership affairs at the NCAA National Office. And I want to thank everyone for being here today. We have another one of our webinar series in the Institutional Performance Program. And the title of today's presentation is Data Drives Opportunity, How to Rethink Your Data and Analytics Strategies. I am really grateful for the two presenters that you're going to hear from today. The first one I'd like to introduce is Dr. Nikki Moore. Dr. Moore is Vice President and Director of Athletics at Colgate University. Nikki has been the Athletic Director and Vice President at Colgate University since 2018. Prior to joining Colgate, Nikki also served in different capacities in the athletic department at North Carolina University and Oklahoma University. Also joining me today is Dr. Dave Schrader. Dr. Dave Schrader is formerly from Terra Data, which is an organization that works with looking at data analytics. Dr. Dave, as he's widely known, has 35 years of industry experience in terms of data analytics and understanding engineering and marketing. And he has worked with countless businesses throughout the country for numerous years. Dr. Dave has worked with a number of colleges and universities of our NCAA membership in divisions 1, 2, and 3. He travels around the country working in helping solve problems and solutions as it relates to data analytics and how data can help to solve problems at different institutions. Dr. Dave holds a computer science degree from Purdue University, and we are so thrilled to have both Dave and Nikki joining us today. So with that, without further ado, I will turn it over to Dave and Nikki. First of all, I want to say thank you both for agreeing to present and to provide this information, and thank you for being here today.
So yeah, I just first of all, thank you so much for having us, and thank you for setting this up. I think it's a really timely topic to be considering with all of the forces that are acting upon us as athletics administrators or leaders in this intercollegiate athletic space. Every opportunity we have to gather better, more accurate insights to guide our decision making, we ought to be trying to do it. And yet we're also all stretched thin. And so I hope that as we walk through this presentation today, we can get some really practical tips on how to really utilize data and develop systems for utilizing it in ways that can benefit us as decision makers and benefit our student athletes. I get to be a part of this in part because of my role as a member of the Strategic Visioning and Planning Committee at the NCAA. In that group, especially in the last year or so, we've spent a fair bit of time talking about things like sports sponsorship thresholds, and I've been on the championship finances working committee and working group, and we're trying to think about these things and again how to make these decisions. And it's difficult, especially if you start to see all of the universities across the country that are starting to cut sports and stuff like that. And how do we make sure that we're supporting sports that make the most sense for our regions? All of those things can, in some ways, be really informed effectively by the effective use of data. So anyway, I will say no more, but I think you can see that from some of the points on the slide as well, that COVID is forcing our hand a little bit. Name, image, and likeness, even transfer report, all of these things sort of speak to we've got to be really thoughtful and strategic and use all the resources we can to make good decisions.
Troy covered most of the introduction, but I thought I'd introduce Nikki in a way that will make sense for her behavior throughout the rest of this. She has a PhD in counseling and sports psychology, so she's been analyzing me. She also admitted that she ran track at Mizzou and did a little bit of cross country and pole vault, but she's bad at numbers and can't remember any of her personal bests. But nonetheless, she will be the voice of the real world in case I get a little too crazy, representing those of you with limited time and resources and a complete understanding of the problem, and be the devil's advocate for what actually can and cannot be done.
And part of why we admit those things is that this topic is one that's a little intimidating to me, honestly. And so if I can engage in this, everybody else can too. So Dave, and it's really a pleasure to get to hear and learn from you, Dave. Dr. Schrader is retired after spending 35 years in the high-tech database industry, advising companies and running advanced development projects and such. And since then, Dave has applied those insights to the world of sports. And one of the things that he does is help set up some Moneyball projects using students on campuses and really helping schools in a way that is fairly low cost and in a really practical way. He's got his PhD from Purdue in computer science. He lives in LA by the ocean, and yet he has decided to spend some time with us to give us access to a true expert in this space. And we'll try to keep it super practical, though. So, with that being said, Dave, I'll turn it back to you.
So that's our setup. Some of you may have seen the presentation that I gave in May of 2019. We put a link at the end here if you want to go back and look at that recording. But as I began the work on sports analytics back in 2014, I started seeing different compartments or areas where you could slot in different projects. So you have everything from the athletic department, needing to decide what non-conference games are going to be played for different sports. You have what Nikki educated me is called the external and internal distinction. I call it front office and back office. So fans and donors go in one bucket. Roster construction recruiting is kind of shared. You have limited scholarships for D1, for example, or financial aid packages. So that kind of all goes into what you can do for the students. And then you hit the areas of what play should come next in football, or, how are we going to change some of our strategies for baseball, coupled with the medical and training area, which I call health and safety. And then the last time I was in Indianapolis, I actually met up with the Horizon League commissioners, because sitting above all of the schools are the need for analytics, the health of the league, membership, things like that. And I'll give you a couple of examples in 3 of these areas, I guess, just to set the stage. But if you want the detail of that presentation, you can go back and find it on the IPP website. So I'm going to start with what you will probably perceive to be a super boring topic of data and data strategy. That was my life. And there's a rhyme and reason. You only do the data work so that you can get the competitive edge through doing insight generation or analytics. And then Nikki's going to keep me on track here by making sure that everything we talk about is practical and you can do them in bite-sized chunks. So Nikki, can you answer this question?
Sort of. And I would say it's probably somewhere between yes and still planning to someday. At the University of North Carolina, I was fortunate to get to be a little bit more of a spectator, kind of involved a little bit as Rick Steinbacher helped set up a data analytics project there, even hired someone, Andrea Johnson, to run it, and got to see a little bit firsthand how powerful this can be. At Colgate, what we have is less organized, as Dave, I think you could probably help us to make it, but we have, we've set up a big spreadsheet, and everybody that's in charge of their area has specific data that they are charged with keeping track of and updating, so that we can then go back and look. And it not only provides us with great talking points when we're talking to donors and recruits, but it also helps us again with the decision making about how we need to allocate resources to get better. So I hope we're going to keep getting better. We don't have a super coherent data strategy yet.
Okay. So if you don't know what a data strategy is, I took a stab at writing it down. It really begins with inventorying what are all your data sources. You might not even have your hands around the fact that you may have multiple things that are doing the same functionality. We'll talk about that in just a second. But it's not just the data collection systems that you've got, it's also who are the users, how do you manage the users, and then what are the uses and how much does it all cost? So that would be step one, where are you? And step two would be, where do you want to be? Where do you need to invest? Where do you need to de-invest? So the reason why you want to do this is because there's the issue of a proliferation of data systems, especially with wearables. So I've sat in training offices where the person pointed to two piles of competing vendors and all of the things that they've collected. And at the bigger schools, the bigger and the richer the school is, the chances are they have one of everything. And at some point, that just becomes unmanageable. You may be wasting money on licenses or not exploiting what you have. So if you can get more value out of the investments that you've already made, that can help in a time of COVID. You also have some liability issues of maintaining access, passwords. But my main point is you're probably missing opportunities. And I'm going to be using the word leverage a lot today, because I think if you can capture the information once, then you can mix it together with other data sets and it becomes the basis for a competitive edge.
Hey, Dave, I'm going to just throw in real quick there. I think the other piece that I look at through, these things is so many of us in athletics administration are in it because we want to provide an increasingly excellent student athlete experience. And when we think about, ultimately these things get down to, are we giving our student athletes the best opportunity to stay healthy, to play on the right days, to train more effectively and more efficiently so that they have, anyway. So I guess I wanted to note that it is about having a competitive edge, but it's also about using our resources to really enhance that student athlete experience.
Yep, point taken, absolutely. So at Colgate, if you were to start with an inventory, what are some of the things that would be in your list?
Oh gosh, for us, we started with thinking about what are our primary goals, and then worked our way backward at figuring out what are some of the data we can track along those things. So, athletic success, academic success, athletics excellence, campus community engagement, resource stewardship, those sorts of things. But so there's academic data that you can collect. There are there's your basic, your athletics stats, but then you've also got things like as we think about donor engagement or fan engagement, you've got website data that you can pull in. You've got, like you said, wearable data. You've got injury data. So there's a lot of data that you can collect. I think for me, the thing I think was to not get paralyzed by realizing there's so much. Like, how do we hone in on those data points that actually are most meaningful, that we can practically track and then practically make sense of?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are you doing social media monitoring?
Yes.
Kind of a popular area right now.
Yeah. We are. The thing we're trying to figure out right now is how do we use the social data monitoring that we're doing and then make it accessible to all of those who are then responsible for generating additional social media, posts and whatnot. So how do we get it out of the communications office and to all of the coaches and other people, myself included, to know, is it better to do a video? Is it better to do a picture? Is it better to do we do it on Twitter? Do we do it on Instagram? So we're still working on how do we get that information to the right users to then be more effective.
Yeah. That's been a big area of interest of mine. I actually at the University of Iowa, when I went there, I met with Christina Bigsby, who had done a PhD thesis on monitoring social media of coaches following students and vice versa, and using that to build a predictive model for where a student, whether they were going to take a scholarship offer. Mm. And then with one of the other coaches I'm going to talk about in a second, he wanted to build what he called a bad boy index of student athletes who are party animals. And I always, when I was on the road before COVID, counseling students of be careful what you put up on social media, because that stuff can be scraped and then scored. Mm. So anyway, social media is one of many areas. And those of you who are watching have probably read the screen. There's just a large number of inventory. But the idea at the end of the day is bit by bit, week by week, can you start cataloging? Maybe you pick one area and start there and write down how many different systems do you have, how many vendors do you have, what's the overall cost as a percent of budget. Do you have a figure of merit there for what percent of total budget should be for data collection systems?
We don't. At Colgate, we do not have a budget for that.
Okay.
At UNC, we did. But even then, it was developed just in the last, 5 or 6 years.
Mm-hmm. In industry, you want to know what the number is? This would be places like Best Buy or 3M or Lufthansa.
Okay, let's hear it, because we probably should be getting closer.
It's around 3% of the budget.
3% of the budget.
Right. Okay. So those are the takeaways from part one. Now let's get into the payoff and the insights. And what we wanted to drill into was getting the 360-degree, in other words, comprehensive view of the, quote, customer is what it would be called in industry. But for you, it might be the 360-degree view of a fan or 360-degree view of the donor. That would be all the interactions that you have with them, any other data that you can collect about them, their family. And then a comparable thing, which is very hot right now, is the 360-degree view of the athlete. So all the information I talked to a friend of mine who works now for a company that did the bubble for the NBA team. So they actually want all the medical information up to date at their fingertips with very low latency, because they need to monitor a spread of COVID. So that motivates a complete view of the athlete. And COVID just amped it up in terms of the requirement to do that. Now, what I'm seeing as a best practice are schools that are doing director of analytics positions. And it's smart really for 3 reasons. Instead of having, for D1, the analytics people down in the revenue sports, you may still need those, but bubbling it up so that they can be shared, and you can orchestrate some best practices. And again, that word leverage comes up. So if you're doing something that's really good in one of your programs, you can leverage. Do you have staff meetings like that where you talk about best practices across the sports? Is that viewed as something?
Definitely. I mean, we do it in other ways, where we will have sport administrator meetings, for example, where the intent is to bring things that could be impactful across sports. At other places, we had like health and performance meetings where everybody that was connected to the health and performance of student athletes, coaches, athletic, sports medicine folks, strength and conditioning folks all came together for conversations about certain topics. But yeah, we do it in other areas, but we haven't started doing it in this area yet.
Yeah. I know a couple of years ago, I met with Peyton Phillips, who at the time was at Mississippi State, and he had that title of Director of Analytics. It was mostly on the front office side, and then he moved over to Oklahoma State. I know Nebraska was the first school in the Big Ten to hire a full-time person. I think Stanford might have been the first one out here in the West Coast. When we talk about the 360-degree view of the fan, the kinds of projects that I'm seeing include messaging analytics, because at the end of the day, a lot of this is marketing 101. And it can include things like ticket pricing. I know there are outside vendors that can help you with that, doing sales. Or do you know this term of lifetime value modeling? Is that a commonly understood thing?
I don't know if it's commonly. Wouldn't hurt to spend a moment on it.
How would you explain it since we
How would I
prepped for
explain
this?
it?
Yeah.
So yeah, the sort of the journey of a fan over the course of their lifetime, and and then how do you bring that fan from childhood to the end of their life, having your institution or your organization be one that is so meaningful that they wish to pass some of their earned wealth to you. Is that about right?
Yep, that was right. That's why I end this slide with donor analytics, right? How much cross-sport monitoring do you do of the fans? Do you have a good idea of which fans are enamored with which sports? How many are multi-sport fans, single sport fans?
Again, I don't know. Again, at Colgate, not so much, but that was definitely a part of the data analytics work at UNC, to understand sort of how you, how the fans' interests intersect with your own, and then how do you tailor what you're delivering according to those interests?
Right. Okay, good. I thought I'd start throwing in some of the projects that I've managed to help make happen. So one of them was for the football commissioner at the Mountain West Conference. And we did fan attendance for single game tickets. And the operational question here is, what drives purchase of single game tickets? There are 12 schools in that conference. You can see here the results from the stats analysis of how many more seats or fewer seats did they get because of different factors. I will say football, when we did this project, was on a decreasing curve for overall attendance. The SEC was holding on to its fans, but they were still dropping. And American Conference was dropping the most at like a accumulated rate of about 4% a year. And the other schools, Mountain West, was in the middle. You can see here some things that came out for this one school was if they played a ranked non-conference opponent, they would sell 7,500 more tickets. On the other hand, in their conference, if they had weak home opponents, they would drop off by 11,000. And the league was experimenting with Thursday night games at the time that we did this study. And as you can see, that was just a terrible idea, or people weren't used to Thursday night games, and they were not showing up for them. So that's the kind of inputs. We also were asked to take a look at kickoff times. And by comparing the time of year compared across all the different schools, one of the recommendations for one of the schools was to shift from a normal 12 o'clock kickoff time for all their games to later in the afternoon. So those are a couple of examples of the kinds of projects when I talk about fans and fan preferences. When it comes to donors, one thing that you can do with analytics, if you've got someone that can just monitor the research literature, I had the pleasure of spending some time at Ohio University, and Liz Wanless is a faculty member there that I think is probably the best in the country on doing analysis of donor relationships. And again, just like the football fan project, you can see a large number of factors that go into donations, like does getting an invitation to March Madness make a difference on donations, right? Is there a different behavior between basketball and football fans at the different schools? And one of our key findings was the first 2 years after graduation are critical of getting the alums back engaged. So just wanted to highlight that as an example of analytics that makes sense. And there's a whole body of literature out there. When I was at the University of Arkansas, I met with their donor group, the Razorback Foundation people, and gave them the benefit of all of that. Do you have any questions on that, Nikki? Makes sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I think it, especially on the 2 slides before that on attendance, you figure this sort of data might be helpful as you're working with your TV partners to kind of weigh the costs and benefits of, sliding games into windows that your TV partner may be interested in, but that then have that other impact, on a different revenue source. So at least knowing kind of what the financial impact can be, or having a better sense of what it could be, would be really helpful.
Yeah. It's a good point. Back when we did this study, we did have some discussions on that topic with the commissioner because nobody wants to go to a game or even watch a game where there are no people
Nobody
in the
fans.
stands. His comment was, you feel like a loser, right? That can be perpetuating. But on the other hand, now that we've gone through COVID, we're plenty used to watching empty stands, but hopefully, I think everybody's dying to get back to watching the games in person. Okay, let's shift from fans now to the 360-degree view of the athlete. This can start with just like the day in the life example. Begins with recruiting, preseason, throughout you're doing training. You may have devices like force plates to measure jumping, sleep monitoring. At one of the conferences I went to, met the sleep analyst for the U.S. Olympic teams. She was quite insightful on going across time zones. I know professional baseball and basketball has people that look at that, mood ratings, nutrition, and then practice game information, especially once you can wear the trackers and you can measure fatigue. And then also students need to stay in school, so you have the academics and then post-graduation success. So there are a lot of opportunities to measure these things one at a time, but my point here is putting it all together so that if Troy played like crap on Saturday, was it because he didn't sleep well? Was it because he got injured and we rotated him back in prematurely? There are a lot of useful insights if you can see the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
Are you using, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like when I just experienced this slide, I think about, that's, that there are probably some really good insights and even answers that live in this data. It's sort of, how do you, without having that dedicated person on your staff who is responsible for trying to integrate all of this and then make sense of it, how do you do it?
Mm-hmm. Well, since I worked in an enterprise data warehousing oriented set of companies, the obvious answer is do that, but you got to do it on a budget. The good news is you can do it in the cloud pretty cheaply, but you will need a database or IT person that can start pulling the information from these systems. And one tip on interacting with vendors is make sure that they have open APIs, which means that you can pull the data and it's not locked up. If it's all locked up, you should not be too interested in that vendor, because then you can't put it together and get those deeper insights. Here's an example on the first area of recruiting. It looks kind of complicated, but it's not. But it kind of shows you all the data points that a wrestling coach has access to while making decisions. So you have the student athletes' high school grades, GPA. Got to make sure that if you admit them, they're going to be successful academically. You may have information about the parents. Financial information, obviously, but also maybe they're alumni. You have the wrestler's high school history, both past history and current history. Normally, right now, wrestling is over, but it's not in Illinois, so we're still adding data from that area. And then you want to measure their interest in this case, University of Dubuque. Does the student athlete respond to communications? How long does it take? Does the student athlete have preference for SMS messages over emails or phone calls? And then finally, you have the character side of things, and there's that bad boy index that I talked about back on social media. So you don't usually think about getting your hands around all the data related to recruiting, but there can be a lot of it if you want to put it all together. And what's interesting to me in this picture is number 3 has everything to do with wrestling, but you could slide that out and slide in baseball or slide in football. And most of the rest of it is pretty much the same collection of data, which argues for maybe thinking this through and doing it at the athletic director level, where you can get some expertise so that you can pull the data together in one place and then help out the different coaches.
Yeah, I suspect it would be really, really helpful just to be more efficient in your recruiting. Could you build this kind of a system and more accurately predict how that recruiting is going to go?
Right. And you can also have high leverage, because what I have seen is a lot of coaches are kind of on their own for recruiting, and yet you have admissions people that probably have very polished Colgate promos and things that can be worked into the mix. And the question is, what are the stages of the interaction with the student athlete that will give you the highest payoff? And in order to answer that question, you all have to be marketing and salespeople, right? In fact, when I was meeting face to face, I would ask coaches, what % of your time during the course of an entire year is spent on recruiting? Do you know what the answer was? What would you guess?
I don't know. I bet they would say 30 to 40%.
The usual answer is 70%.
Oh, really?
Through the course of a whole year. And some coaches like doing recruiting and a lot of them don't. So what you can do is leverage the best practices across all of these things, and you can capture every interaction. So I actually am doing this right now with some student help at a school. And just for one recruiting season, we've got more than 100,000 interactions that we can play around with, and we can see which messages got open, which ones were duds, which ones should be replaced, how often should you interact, what's too long a period of interacting, what's too fast an interview. At the end of the day, who did you get and who did you not get? And we can do the factor analysis. To help the coaches save time, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. It was in the talk I gave a couple of years ago. Recruiting's like Match.com. So you really want to here are all the factors of what the coach's dreams would be for the best athletes. And then you have to get the student viewpoint. So we actually did surveys of students that did go to this school. And now you can see where the match is. And in the usual way, the upper right-hand quadrant is the important area where the coach wants the student athlete and vice versa. So that's where the coach should spend his time, his valuable time, and the assistant coaches should look at the next tier of people. And then you can color code them. In the wrestling case, the colors are different weight classes. And the size of the dot is how communicative is the student, is he responding or not? And so you get a bird's eye view of how many people are out there. I got to listen to the Army football coach speak in January at a coaching clinic, and someone asked, how many student athletes do you begin with at Army in the funnel each year? And the answer is 10,000. So I don't know how you don't use technology to sort through where you're going to have the biggest payoff.
A quick question for you, Dave. Once you deliver these insights, do you find that coaches are good at making the behavioral shifts that they might suggest, or is there resistance there? Is there resistance to believing the data?
They have to want it to start off with. If they're feeling like they're wasting a lot of time and there's probably a better way, if they have that intuition, that's cool. If they get on board, usually the head coaches will be the starting point. If they mandate it, then the assistant coaches fall in line. One person I work with wants almost a scoreboard on the coaches. Did they do the follow-up calls in the right period of time? Right? I know at one of the SCC schools where I know the recruiting person, the assistant coaches are handed something on Saturday morning, and it's based on the GAs watching game film on Friday night. Even though they've got a big game coming up against a big school, those assistant coaches must make those reach outs and tell the high school athletes good job and keep some mind share going.
Yeah.
But I think it's a mixed bag like everything else. And to be honest, it's no different from industry, right? Some people are the laggards, some people are the leaders. Usually the laggards get their butt kicked sales-wise by the leaders, and then they catch on. And that's kind of the gist of Moneyball. It's an evolving state of affairs.
Thanks.
Okay, let's talk about organization, and this is probably my favorite thing to talk about. But you can pay a lot of money to hire these analysts, but honestly, it's not that difficult. And you can treat your athletic department like a data lab. And there are people in the faculty that would probably love to work with you if you can provide problems and data sets. And they may be in the business school or econ department, or a lot of people have started data science, and they need projects to do for those students. They can do the back of the book assignments, but you know what? Those aren't nearly as much fun as helping your own school do a better job on the field or help getting to know the athletic department. I will say a rule of thumb, the smaller the school, the more open they are about giving their data out. The more high powered they are, everything is a big secret and you can't even get in the door. Right? But these students will happily do Moneyball projects for you and you don't have to pay them hardly anything. And they love it, and I've seen it actually work. If they put that on their resume, that's the first thing a recruiter from an industry company is going to go look at. Because honestly, all the people coming out of these programs all look alike on paper. But if they've done an interesting project and everybody loves sports, that's what the interviewer is going to ask about.
Interesting. Yeah.
So the projects that I showed you were all done by students. So the Mountain West Conference project was done by 2 teams and faculty help from Scott Nestler, who was at our 2019 event. And they did part 1 of the project, and then 2 faculty in operations research had a whole class of 24 Air Force Academy cadets do the rest of the project. The wrestling recruiting project I've done over a period of 3 or 4 years with 3 different students. And it looks like we have time. You want to hear about one more project? And this is underway right now.
Yeah, I'd be curious.
So you're going to laugh. In Michigan, I went to attended on Zoom a high school football coaches association meeting in Michigan. And there were 9 head coaches, including the Army guy, Jeff Monken, who were talking to them. And I just wanted to hear, what is the state of the art? What's Ryan Day from Ohio State saying to people in Michigan? It turned out it was much more than Michigan. It was 2,000 people on the call. But there were 2 high school coaches that did follow-ups with me, and both of them said, I love the idea of analytics. I don't know what I'm doing. Can you help me? And I said, well, I can help you, but more importantly, I will find students who want to do a project for you. So right now, I'm working with 6 teams of students from Purdue, LSU, and Auburn. So here are the 2 high school coaches. They have slightly different goals. Below are the 2 faculty members, Ashish and Peter at LSU and Auburn, and I'm helping out the Purdue people because they're in a club. And then just for fun, we have an Auburn defensive scout who graduated, who's our defense subject matter expert. And then we have someone who played at Holy Cross as quarterback. And he actually works part-time for a pro team, rating people. So how cool is this project, right? Mm-hmm. And the answer is the students are knocking it out of the park. Typically, we get the Huddle game film. If you're familiar with Huddle, each game, this is Grand Ledge High School, we get 2 views, the end zone view and the press box view, and it's all marked up. So we get an Excel spreadsheet across the top there. This is play 24, Grand Ledge is on offense, 3rd and 5. And we know what the outcomes were, and what we really want to do is analyze a lot of game film and put it all together. So Coach Joe's goal is, I need to beat this one team. My life would be complete if I can beat this one team. So we have a couple of the teams that are just looking at this one team and giving him all kinds of ideas, watching all the annotated scout film and the games against them. The other guy wants to do everything. So he's actually the executive director of the Michigan High School Association. He wants to know everything about everything. So we have 4 teams helping him because the number of game films were much higher. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is provide useful insights both for the week before a game and then real time within a game on stopping explosive plays and winning the down. That's kind of a figure of merit. So it's 1st and 10, and you hold them within 5 yards, then your defense has won the down. Let me give you an example courtesy of my alma mater, Purdue. This is situational analysis for the defensive coordinator. So you just check the boxes on an iPad will be the implementation. So this is a medium distance to 1st down in the middle part of the field and a 2nd down. And what comes back on the screen will be, we think that team's going to run as opposed to pass for this game situation. And instead of giving them the numbers like percentages, we just made the size of the bubbles. And we also color coded what on average would be the downs or the amount of yardage that they would get. Mm. So you get the idea? Is that a clear enough explanation?
Yeah, it's very cool.
So all the guy in the press box needs to do is just collect what down it is in distance, and back will come this picture which shows you the relative percentages of what's coming up. The fanciest stuff, and we actually are using technology that when I was working, we used at the banks to detect fraud. In this case, what we're doing is taking a look at what offensive formation and what opponent's defense failed so that my team got big yardage and explosive plays, a run of 12 or a pass of 15. And this is all interactive. One of the coaches has it, and I will hear tomorrow how he enjoyed looking at all the data through the visual technique. So I didn't have the space to put it all in here, but you go to the right-hand side and click on the pink bar, and then only the explosive plays will show up. And then when you back up, you can follow the arc, and the width of the arc tells you how many times that happened. And you go back to the middle part of what was the defensive front that gave it up.
I would be curious, do you get much feedback from coaches who are actually using this on how often what the system tells you is different than what they would intuit?
Oh, we measure all of that. We measure all of that after the game. That'll be part of the post-game analysis that you do on Sundays and give the feedback. But when I did this project for the first time, the defensive coordinator coach wanted to know if he could take this kind of picture and go show it to the Green Bay Packers. And it's like, I think the students would be very happy if you wanted to show off the analytics that they're capable of doing. So that's what's going on right now. We can head into the finish line here for the end zone of what are you going to do differently on Monday. So our goal was to make this something that you can do an hour a day, right?
No, we will not be doing that an hour a day. Remember, it was an hour a week.
Or a week, okay.
I might be willing to give you an hour a week. Maybe somebody on my staff could give you 30 minutes a day, but I don't even know about that.
Yeah. Okay, so the recommendation is you can start maybe just doing one of these each week, right? Start with the data inventory. What do you have? Who's using it? How many vendors do you have? Is it being used? That's actually a very interesting question. I've been to some big schools where they're paying for licenses and they just forgot that they've got it. They're kind of on autopilot. So the other big thing is, are you using all the technology that you pay for? Maybe you need to increase training. You know, maybe people are just scratching the surface of the value that they could get, and then figure out what's table stakes and what might give you a competitive edge. And I think the thing that we should not forget about that you've highlighted is, what are your staff capable of doing? You know, it could be that you need to send them for training, or you need to hire GAs that have more of a math bent and can do some of these kinds of projects, or do outreach to the business school. The other way that you can do this as you go from data to analytics is to maybe pick a box here. And I can help you if you want with more details of sample projects that other people have done. Designating a leader. For you, it might be a part-time job as part of someone's day job. Maybe they're already in the fan management area, but you can start staging things. A couple of tips I've heard from schools is, I'm going to try this out, but I'm going to do it with non-revenue first because they don't get a lot of love. Or I'm going to do it with women's sports first and just try it out and see. And I think that's great, right? If the the women's teams coaches are getting advantages, you might just create the demand from the other people who have done it their way for quite a while. Mm-hmm. So it's about making change happen. Mm-hmm. And because of the connections I have with a lot of the business schools, if anybody listening wants help, I can probably help with reaching out if you want to do that.
Yeah, that's great.
You want to make any comments on either the bite-sized data part or analytics?
I think your most recent comment of being willing to help, I think some of us who are a little less comfortable maybe in this space, I think just having a mentor or having someone or having a resource, that we can turn to kind of get some baby steps going, and to try to get some momentum, could be a pretty important first step. But I think your point about, business school or, the econ department, finding, maybe someone there on your own campus to at least start having some conversations about this could help get the ball rolling too.
Yeah. Another way that you can get started, there's a great book by Ben Alamar. It's, I think, 4 years old. It's very easy to read. It's not very big. In fact, I have it right here. It's only that big. So if you have an hour, maybe in 2 hours, you could read this book all the way through, but it has a lot of the basics in it. And if you have any stats background like you do, and you want a refresher on stats, I would recommend the Severini book, because it just walks you back through Stats 101, but using all examples from sports. So it will give you an idea of what you might be getting into. If you want to attend conferences, the MIT Sloan School is the granddaddy of them all, 15 years running. Unfortunately, it just happened. I've gone to it, I think, 6 years now. There are also regional conferences, and many of them are sprinkled around the country. I went to one at Central College in Iowa on Zoom, and it was great. I know Samford, Carnegie Mellon has one coming up, and they're all mostly in the fall and the spring. The other thing that you could do if you just wanted to find students is to launch a sports analytics club. So I've given talks at all of these. I actually met the Harvard and Stanford students at the MIT conference, and they were the ones that invited me to come on campus. And you would be amazed. I had dinner with the Harvard guys and women, and I think there were 20 people at the dinner, 9 of whom are managers for their team, but they're not water boy managers. They're actually analytics managers. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these people are very, very good. And they're also writing blog entries. So if you want to see more examples of what students are doing, you can go to any of these schools. But that would be my recommendation of how to start off. So we made it to the finish line right on time. I'm happy to report. You want to make any final comments, Vicki?
I think I appreciate the being able to see kind of what is some of the things that are possible, and then really thinking about what are some first steps that you can take. And just like with anything that's kind of new, it is important to take that first step. Just take a small bite of it, because you'll get through that and have new knowledge, and then be able to take the next one. So it may seem simple, but I think it is. It's simpler than than data analytics itself kind of feels at times. So I just
yeah, the analytics label, I think it's the ugliest word of all. I would recommend you call it insights, and think about how many insights can we generate with the data that we've already got, and what kind of insights do we need? And just with a little bit of reading or taking a look at the things that I recommended, you can probably start jotting down the list, and then that would drive what data you need to go get, or what are the kinds of students that you want to recruit. Mm-hmm. And what I've found really amazing is I'm not really a sports person, right? I did debate. Mm-hmm. which is kind of like a sport. You're on the road all
There
the
you go.
time. We have national championships. But what I found was it is so easy to do this work because it's the very same set of problems, right? So if you're taking a look at industry of, will Nikki Moore renew her Verizon contract at the end? It's not a lot different from, who should USC go after for season ticket renewals at end of term? The problems are pretty much, or even, machine breakdowns for locomotives or jet engines, those models for failure analytics can be applied to pro athletes. It's the same problem. So there are a lot of really smart people out there that know how to do those things, and they're being taught that probably on your own campus. And it's not a big jump for them to analyze some sports problems for you.
Yeah, that's great. It seems like there are plenty of opportunities to create some really good win-win situations and to develop some good relationships across campus.
Yep.
Dave, Nikki, thank you so much. This was really, really great information and useful information as we move forward. We did have a couple of questions that I wanted to ask, and it looks like there's a few other questions coming into the Q&A. So the first question, and I'll just ask you, are there other places on campus where units are utilizing students in order to develop this data, that if you're talking to someone in the athletic department and they're looking for examples of where students are helping solve problems on campus, are there any examples or any ideas you're familiar with?
I guess I would say students call me regularly. They get donor jobs. I don't know if they let them do the donor analytics or whether they're just given a call sheet and incented to maximize donations. I think some students get jobs in admissions. Again, I don't know if they're doing analytics. It's to me a little bit sad that they don't use them, right? They're treating them like general purpose call center agents.
I'm trying to think of any that I'm aware of, and I admit that this has been a really good kind of kick in the pants for me to get a little more connected with other parts of campus who might be doing this or who are training students to do this, because I'm sure that there are. And occasionally I do get, like, for example, we have a Thought into Action program, an entrepreneurship program on our campus. And I know that they do some of this work. So that might be one of the early places that I go look.
Yeah. When I was at the MIT conference a year ago, one of the pairs of students that were doing a readout, they did a really nice job. There were two students that met at a conference at Carnegie Mellon, one from Carnegie Mellon, one from Purdue. And the Purdue one is Matt Painter's basketball analytics person who's majoring in data science. So there's a real live example of a student doing the work.
What are the recommendations on how to use data collected during COVID when comparing it to data in non-COVID years? So many areas in athletics, academics, attendance, etc., have had variables that make it very tough to compare data from other years. So how do you compare these COVID years to, I don't want to call it a normal year, but the question is for a non-COVID year or the non-COVID years?
Dave, that's all yours.
That one's easy. Toss the data out. If it was a totally abnormal year, that's going to screw up your calculations, or you can put a COVID factor in there and it'll just jump out as statistically significant when paired with the year. But I would just drop it out of the data set.
Is there any way to make an adjustment for it? So that you can, because I would assume that you could still see, for example, for us with academics, you can still see some slight trends, from sport to sport or from team to team. The teams that are generally have higher GPAs have way higher GPAs, versus those who are maybe a little bit lower, also are a little bit lower. But I don't know that it's better just to throw.
I think an interesting project would be create a baseline pre-COVID and then see how all the numbers changed, how the KPIs, the key performance indicators all changed because of COVID. And then maybe take those two things together as the basis for the return of fans. What does that diagram look like? At what rate did you lose fans? Maybe forever? Or are fans so hungry that they're going to come streaming back in, and season tickets, for some of the schools are going to be extremely hard to come by because people are so eager to get back into a normal mode. So you could envision a variety of ways of analyzing the data. But I think COVID is such an anomaly with the shutdown that my first intuition is don't use it in the data set at all. If you're trying to analyze things under normal times, hopefully we get back to normal.
If we have someone who is trying to develop a budget to get the administration, in this case it's an athletic department, to pay for a data analytic position, are there examples of what that job description should look like, and how do you justify the expense of hiring someone to do data analytics?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. You got it.
Okay. So there are job descriptions out there. I think I collected a few of them 2 years ago, mostly so that I could educate students on what the requirements are for people that are posting these jobs. The justification, I can probably, if you want to send me an email, put you in touch with people who managed to get those jobs, and they may or may not be able to help with how do you justify it. But I'm beginning to see a trend. I haven't talked to a couple of those people in probably 9 months, so it might be worthwhile to use this question as an impetus to ask that question of them, because they'd be far better equipped to know what the answer is.
I would start too with finding some jobs that are already out there. Find some departments that already have analysts and reach out to them. I think that's one of the beautiful things in intercollegiate athletics that I have found is that folks tend to have a pretty open hand in terms of helping each other to find these ways of advancing. I think the other piece is really, I think, putting it into concrete terms, identifying some of the specific questions or the specific areas that you think your particular institution could do better at, and then how adding this kind of position could help solve or help improve that particular thing. I mean, just again, making it very tangible or practical. The other piece is Dave, I would be curious to hear your thoughts. I mean, I think it's a super interesting point that you made that in industry that 3% of the total budget is typically what's reserved for this kind of investment. Clearly, there's a belief that there is a real return on that investment, and I'd just be curious to kind of hear how any strategies that or insights that have come from industry that could help justify using that kind of an expenditure in athletics.
Mm-hmm. Well, the simplest answer I would give is a lot of the industry people, especially in the marketing organizations, there are just three kinds of marketing campaigns: acquisition, growth, and retention. So those would be the three practical things. So what's the value of increasing your fan base at this rate as opposed to this rate or that rate, right? And growing share of wallet. If you can get people to buy season tickets for basketball and football and women's volleyball or other revenue sports, what does that do to the overall budget? And a sliver of that can be allocated to this person paying their own way. What's the value of retention campaigns? So, donors that don't drift away. A lot of people need to take a look at those three marketing things: acquisition, growth, and retention, and then say, what amount of money would I spend if I could hit those increases to the overall budget? And then I think you've got your back of the envelope business case.
One other quick point. I mentioned identifying the specific problem that you're interested in solving and just making sure that that specific problem is perceived as a problem by your athletics administration. So, trying to become really tuned into, what are the challenges that your particular institution is trying to address. And if this helps to provide a solution at a relatively low cost, then your chances become much better.
I can't believe that the hour has gone by so quickly. And so I really would like to thank Dave, Nikki, not only for your time today. This was some really great information that you shared with our audience. We also want to share with you that there are a number of other sessions coming up. If you are liking the content that we have, let us know. Really interested to hear your feedback. As I mentioned, there's some other sessions that are coming up. As you see, some of them are TBD, and we're going to get the information out to you as soon as we can with the date and time of those sessions. But again, here's a listing of some items that we're thinking about. Other items that you all think are important, let us know. We're happy to work with our subject matter experts to put content that can really help you in the work that you're doing on your campus. So on behalf of my colleagues in academic and membership affairs, I'd like to again thank Nikki, Dave, well done. Really appreciate your time. And thank you so much for this rich information that you shared with our audience today. Thank you both, and thank everyone for watching today, and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for attending. Thanks, Nikki. Troy.